but I assure you that it was accomplished, and to me it was like a series of revelations. I didn't even care about the I Ching, and the notion that out of myself I could extract the techniques to collapse this wave and to produce something coherent out of it, it was like a revelation. And I don't even today know that much about the mathematical ways of handling waves. I'm sure that I reinvented the wheel in some sense, but the point is that I did reinvent it all by myself. And when it was over, I had something which I could show to people. I had the notion that there is a factor in reality which we have previously missed, which is called novelty. Right? And novelty is something which comes and goes. Taoism is talking about this. In the Tao Te Ching it says the way that can be told of is not an unvarying way. Way is clearly a mistranslation for wave. And So then, okay, you have this thing, you've reduced it to one level, it is now an object of reasonable research. But what are the periods? What are the frequencies? What are the harmonic resonances by which this thing expresses itself in time? In other words, what I had generated up to this point was a wave unscaled against the world. And the teaching voice said, now we will show you how to scale this against the world. Remember that there are 384 Yao in the complete sequence. 384 is a number that has not been well regarded by calendar makers. It's 19 days longer than a solar year. However, there have been lunar calendars at various times among the pre-exilic Jews and other people where 384-day lunar calendars were used. I found out all this after the fact. What the voice proposed was that I look at lunations, and I discovered what seemed to me an astonishing fact, which is a lunation is 29.53 days long. 29.53 times 13 is 383.89. So it comes very, very close to being exactly 13 lunations. So I looked at that, and then I said, well, I constructed this wave through application of these principles of hierarchical ordering that are inimical to Chinese thinking. I will now, using the same periodicities, apply the thing to time and see if I get astrological correlations at higher levels. So I took 384 days and I multiplied it times 64. That's the obvious multiplicand. And you get 67 years, 104.25 days. Now, if we think of that as a hexagram, it should have 6 lines embedded within it. If you divide 67 years, 104.25 days by 6, you get a number which is very, very close to the average duration of a sunspot cycle, 11 plus years. However, people who study the sun know that there isn't only the famous 11-year sunspot cycle. There is also a larger cycle of 33 years where the peak reaches a greater height. Well, that then would be the trigrammatic level of this hexagram. So what I seemed to have was a lunar calendar which was also capable of keeping track of sunspot cycles. Now, the earliest observation of sunspots occurs in China and is a naked eye observation from around 12 AD. So obviously, and we don't know whether there was part of a tradition of observing these things or not. So then I was very pleased with that. And I said, well, that's interesting. So what happens if you take 67 years, 104.25 days, and multiply it by 64, the same multiplicand used before? And the answer is 4,306 years, is something like that. And I thought that was very interesting, because that is exactly 2 zodiacal ages. It takes approximately 2,200 years, and there's argument about the length of zodiacal ages because there's argument about the width of the sign, the number of degrees to be assigned to each sign. So, but it was remarkably good correlation. And then the voice said, now multiply that not by 64, the previous multiplicand used, but by 6, the number of lines in a hexagram. When you do this, you get 25,800 years, within 1% of the value accepted for the precessional great year in which the zodiacal signs move around the Earth in a roughly 26,000 year cycle. Well, you know, great thrills for the person who discovered it, but so far all we have is a Neolithic calendar constructed out of the I Ching. The notions that then began to be put forth were that the ancient Chinese had assimilated this notion through their early development of what are called stilling of the heart techniques, which are this particular stripe of yoga that aims for complete suppression of bodily functions in order to contemplate the mind in its nakedness, you know, uncontaminated by the gross attributes that are being reflected upon it by the body. And the notion was that they were actually observing a fact in nature, that this is not simply a calendar, it is the calendar. It is some kind of previously unnoticed thing present in the world which is mitigating change. Recall that I said that what we had was a figure which was together at the beginning, flowed apart in a series of interference patterns, and then flowed together at the end and restored the value of 0. In other words, if you think of 0 as parity, parity is conserved by this wave. So the notion was that this hierarchical calendar is not an eternal calendar. It's a calendar with a built-in closure. And this is hard to visualize, so I won't spend too much time on it. But the last 3 values in the wave are 0. Consequently, as you approach the last 3 positions on the wave in any of these duration schemes I've mentioned, 384 days, 67 plus years, 4,300, as you approach the last 3 positions, the higher level in the hierarchy is given a value of 0, and it ceases to contribute its valuation to the lower levels. So you get a sudden drop in the mathematical value of the wave. And these things, for a long time I called them passages, and I called them necks, and I called them different things. Jose calls them harmonic convergence, something like that. And I saw them as places where novelty rushed into the world at a much faster rate than it had done before. And yes, and then I saw that the entire career of being in space-time is affected by this curious property of intensification of novelty and acceleration of time. And we have tended to, because we view the universe as fragmented, we have tended not to connect this up to the universe. We believe human history is an abomination unrelated to biology, and modern times an abomination unrelated to sacral and mythical civilizations, and so forth. But what this notion was suggesting was that matter, I don't know how far back you care to go, but that something is in the process of becoming